Yeah, Gideon's army,
He had an army
and
of
God kind
men
of
following.
went it down to what, 300 people?
300, yes, from thousands, and he still won. Right? Well, he was a pretty regular guy. I mean, when that angel appeared to him, he was threshing wheat. And during that time, remember the Midianites were seriously oppressing Israel. And they were living in caves and hiding, and the Midianites would come and ruin their crops and steal their livestock. So they were under a lot of oppression at the time when this angel appeared to Gideon. And there's some lessons, some takeaways from the 3 chapters, 6, 7, and 8 in Judges that refer to or talk about Gideon. And I thought we could talk about some of those takeaways this morning, some of the lessons that we can learn from the life of Gideon and that time period that are, I think, very applicable to us today. So the first takeaway, the first thing I'd like to bring up and talk with you about was that idols can be very powerful. Idols can have a very serious and powerful effect on us, as it did during this time of Gideon. And we see that when we start reading this section here about Gideon in Judges, and it's chapter 6, verses 24 through 30 that say, so Gideon built an altar to the Lord there, called it the Lord's Peace. The Lord is peace. To this day it stands in Ophrah of the Abiezrites. Same night the Lord said to him, take the second bull from your father's herd, and the one 7 years old, tear down your father's altar to Baal, cut down the Asheroth pole beside it. Then build a proper kind of altar to the Lord your God on top of this height. Using the wood of the Asheroth pole you cut down, offer the second bull as a burnt offering. So Gideon took 10 of his servants and did as the Lord told him. But because he was afraid of his family and the townspeople, he did it at night rather than in the daytime. In the morning, when the people of the town got up, there was Baal's altar demolished with the Asheroth pole beside it cut down, and the second bull sacrificed on the newly built altar. They asked each other who did this. When they carefully investigated, they were told Gideon, son of Joash, did it. The people of the town demanded of Joash, bring out your son, he must die, because he has broken down Baal's altar and cut down the Asheroth pole beside it. So people like to hang on to their altars, or their idols, right? Gideon was, and he was afraid, not only afraid of the townspeople, his own family he was afraid of. And it's an illustration, and everyone wants him killed because of him destroying and removing their idol. And people get upset when idols are exposed, when they're confronted with just how important their idol is to them and the loss of it. And they're angry here. They're angry enough to kill. They're not just upset like their car was damaged or their house burned down or someone did something like that to them. This is an over-the-top response where they want his life. So these idols had pretty powerful sway over the people around Gideon and his own family. And he was raised in a culture saturated with idols and idolatry. And it was full of anger, full of conflict. And when I look at this verse, these verses in this record, it kind of indicates to me there's a connection sometimes between anger and idolatry. And I think that's also reflected in the book of James. We've read this verse many times. What's the source of wars and fights among you? Don't they come from your passions that wage war within you? You desire and you have not. You murder, covet, cannot obtain. You fight and wage war. You do not have because you do not ask. You ask and you don't receive because you ask with the wrong motives, that you may spend it on your pleasures. You adulterous people. Don't you know that friendship with the world is hostility towards God? So whoever wants to be a friend of the world becomes the enemy of God. Or do you think it is without reason that the scripture says the spirit he made to dwell in us envies intensely? And when I read this, especially thinking of Gideon and that record we just read there, I wonder sometimes, do anger and conflict sometimes expose idolatry? And do they often kind of expose the places in our hearts where we're worshiping something other than God? Because this is do we have a defensive response? Is it related to defending our idols, anger, conflict? And I think that anger and the choices we make in anger can sometimes reveal where we are willing to sin and get what we want. And so, to give you an example and something that we can discuss, you think about maybe that promotion you really want at work, or that boat maybe you really want, that recognition for something you've accomplished that's important to you in your life, or wanting people to be more loving and forgiving, you name it. I think sometimes there's a progression that goes from we really want something and we don't get it, and we began to insist on it or demand it. And then we become defensive in why we want to keep that. And it's not that everything we want and desire or any of that is wrong. There's nothing wrong with wanting your child to get straight A's in school. But when they don't, and we get angry, or any of these things we get angry, I think it's important we ask ourselves, where's our anger coming from? Are we worshiping something? We have this idol in front of us that when we don't get it, we get defensive, we get anger. And certainly anger is not an indication of an idol in our life, right? Anger is many times a healthy emotion. My wife used to be angry at me all the time. It wasn't because she idolized me, it was because I made some kind of boneheaded decision or something, I don't know, but it wasn't idolatry. But so anger is okay, but when we have these feelings, we have these emotions like anger, I think it's important sometimes, in light of these records, where's that anger coming from? What are we trying to defend? What is causing us to maybe get in conflict with someone, an angry conflict with someone? I don't think we'd want to kill someone because of our idols sometimes, but we got lawyers that kill people for us, right? Financially or whatever. What do y'all think about that? About anger being related, anger, conflict being related to idolatry. I'm going to bring up one more scripture here. Because, let's listen to this. Do you think the scriptures have no meaning? They say that God, can't see that, is passionate, that the spirit he's placed within us should be faithful to him. And he gives you, and gives it generously. As the scriptures say, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. So humble yourselves before God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Come close to God, he will come close to you. Wash your hands, you sinners, purify your hearts, for your loyalty is divided between God and the world. Let there be tears for what you have done. Let there be sorrow and deep grief. Let there be sadness instead of laughter and gloom instead of joy. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up in honor. And that's from the New Living Testament. When we get angry, maybe a good question to ask ourselves is, am I being humble to God right now? I think it's possible to be angry and humble to God at the same time. But we should ask ourselves, are we? Because if that humility to God isn't there in our anger, we should maybe question what is causing our anger. And is it something that we place too much value on? We place, is it potentially an idol? Any thoughts on all the rambling?
Well, I don't necessarily get angry when I don't get my way or get what I want. I finagle around and see if there's not a way I can wriggle it out. Which is telling me it's an idol.
Yeah.
Mhm.
How does that make you feel?
After I just, well, what you just said makes me feel pretty bad.
I mean, you don't feel angry, but do you have other feelings that may indicate that to you when you're trying to finagle?
No, I just try to get real creative about how I go about it.
Something you really want.
I really want.
Any other thoughts? Yes.
The whole time you're talking there, I was thinking selfish.
Selfish?
It's like, if when we're like that, it's all about me, like, I'm angry because something's not right in my eye, you know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
Something I want, or something didn't happen the way I wanted it, so maybe I would get angry. Well, it's really pointing toward my selfishness sometimes.
Dave?
I don't know that anger is always the root, but I think that passion creates that sometimes, that if these people weren't passionate about their idols, then if they get knocked over and crushed and cut down, then man, that's a shame.
Yeah.
But even, the passion to serve Jehovah caused the crowds and the leaders of the Jews to crucify Christ.
Yeah.
It wasn't idolatry, it was a passion for God that they thought was being blasphemed. They thought their God was being blasphemed, so killed. The Crusades, in the name of God, were done because they were passionate about their belief, and that others, and same way with other religions who will kill if their God is in some way blasphemed. People who have strong ideologies will assassinate, will kill, will create chaos, blow things up, blow up buildings and stuff, because they believe so strongly in whatever it is that they feel like killing someone else who is on the opposite side of that is legitimate.
And applauded too.
You know what?
Applauded, like, if you
Yeah,
kill somebody for
yeah.
the faith, that's a good thing in their eyes.
I'm glad you did. Yay.
Well, that's a great point, Dave, and maybe a better way to phrase it is watching over our passions. When we are passionate about something and that something is threatened or challenged, or maybe someone's trying to remove it, we're passionate about it. Maybe one of the ways our passion is expressed is in anger. Sometimes it's in other emotions, but we are passionate about the truth. We are passionate, we should be. And when we have these passions, we have these strong feelings, we should ask ourselves, why do I feel so strongly about that? Is it God or is it something else? Any other thoughts on those?
Yeah, we have to be careful about where we allow our passions to take us, because as you were talking, I was thinking about the Crusades and how, the Christians went and slaughtered Muslims in defense of Christianity, which I don't think made God very happy.
Well, our passions, we've seen it in the history of the Christian church. We certainly see it in the Old Testament, but in the New Testament, where people's passions can be misplaced and cause them to do ungodly things rather than godly, even though they think they're being godly. And it's so often seen in the way the church has sometimes treated other people. Church has done a lot of really wonderful things that honor and glorify God, but we do need to not necessarily keep our passions in check, but make sure that our passions are godly for the right reasons. God made us, and so we are passionate about something. There's nothing wrong with that, but what is it that's driving that passion? Here, which we read just here in Judges, their idolatry was driving their passion to the point they were willing to kill someone that was trying to get in the way. Bill?
Well, I think you kind of answered what I was thinking, and that, I'm getting kind of confused here, okay? Does the passion cause the idol, or does the idol cause the passion? And, you know, to me, this is more the idol causing the passion. They've created something that they've turned to worshiping
Mm-hmm.
because they wanted something physical in front of them instead of a God that they didn't see. And so they have this that they're worshiping, and that caused the passion, which was the anger and the killing and stuff. So I'm kind of getting flipped around here in my own mind and trying to figure out what's the cause and what's the effect.
Yeah. Well, to me, the important thing is that when we feel passionately about something, we're introspective, and we ask ourselves and investigate as need be, why am I passionate about this? So, any other thoughts on that before we move on?
I'll speak up and say, you know, passion and anger for the right reasons can be a good thing. I
Yeah.
think we have to step back and understand that anger is not a sin.
No.
It's that line that you cross with it. And I still love this point about Jesus. You know, Jesus got angry.
Yeah.
You know, I still go back to the money changers in the temple. Jesus was passionate about his Father. He's passionate about what he stood for. And when you walk into the temple and you see money changers everywhere, he got angry.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you know, that's just one little piece, but I use that in my own day-to-day to say it's okay to be angry for the right justifiable reasons, because our job is to defend God's word. It is to defend what is right and help others along their path. If we don't have that emotion of a little bit of anger, that passion, then we're never driven off of our seats. We'll just sit here like bumps on a log then. I think what's interesting about Gideon, I mean, idolatry is one thing, but what I read in that story is you're going against the grain. You know, Gideon it's not just the idol, but you're going against a large crowd of people that followed one way. And for any of us, think about our life situations. It's harder to rise up against a large group of people that may believe A, and here you are trying to justify B, this lonely guy. That is daunting.
That's very
And
daunting.
it's, you know, until that large group sees the value in your particular belief, it's going to take some time and you're going to fight an uphill battle. So it's just, you know, it's an interesting correlation. We live in this, today what we live in is not much different than what Gideon was exposed with then. I mean, we use a few different words, but
Mm-hmm.
think about ourselves politically or whatever today. It's always harder for us to raise our voice when you've got such a large population around you believing something opposite of you.
And like Gideon, sometimes in our own family.
Even worse. Absolutely. It's one thing when you try to rise up against a group of strangers. You don't have any real connection, but your family, that's tough.
Yeah.
I think we've all been down that path in some capacity.
Well, the point is, you know, we have emotions. We're emotional people. Our emotions come from the way we're made by God. But strong emotions can cause us to do things, and we should learn and evaluate. Like you said, when you were thinking about the money changers, Brian, and you're thinking about what you're angry about, and we can conclude that it's a godly type of anger, or an anger that's driven by something else, and sometimes that can be an idol. Point I wanted to make in that. Secondly, here, anyone else have any comments on that before we move on? Last week we talked about our self-image, and we made a big long list that someone erased on the whiteboard there of who we are according to God. And was that you, Dave? You're looking kind of guilty there.
He was naming who it was.
You don't have to mention it in public.
What he's angry about.
He's passionate.
I should be angry at people. In any case, which I'm not gonna write down again, but Gideon went through a phase there where he changed his self-image. And we see it early on in the record where he's talking to this angel that appears to him, who's telling him what he's gonna do, and he's gonna be a great warrior and all this stuff. Gideon says, wait a minute. Pardon me, Lord. How can I save Israel? My clan's the weakest in Manasseh, and I'm the least in my family. That's not exactly an attitude of someone that's going to lead to great victories or lead men to great victories as in the military. And certainly, it's not the attitude you would think that someone would have that's mentioned in the book of Hebrews later as a hero of faith, so to speak. But the question comes up to me is what changed Gideon and gave him confidence? And I believe it was knowing that God was with him and that what God had called him to do was actually a genuine calling. But it took some conversation with these angel. Sometimes it says Lord, sometimes it says angel, understanding exactly what that means is above my pay grade, so I'm not going in there. But it took some conversation, it took some signs, some convincing to get Gideon to the place where he believed that he could do what God was calling him to do. And, we can look at all our weaknesses, we can look at our flaws and mistakes, we can look at our backgrounds and upbringing and all that stuff and think, there's no way that we can be the person that God is calling us to be. And it takes some convincing, it takes some time, it takes some exposure to God and His message to us to get to the place where we trust that is true. And if we decide to follow Christ and think of our own weaknesses and flaws and shortcomings, we would never do it. So the question that comes to me is, what does it take to convince us? Because I don't think that any of us have had an angel appear to us and tell us, okay, here's what I'm calling you to do, Rick, Bill. What convinces us that God's calling is true and genuine? How do we get to the point where we talked earlier about being passionate about that calling and living a godly life, being a follower of Christ? What convinces us to do that?
Well, I think you said one thing, time.
Time.
I think about ourselves younger, when I chose to be baptized and take on Christ, or I watch my boys make a decision in their life to do that same thing. It was at different times, and it takes time for every individual to personally find that out for themselves, experience that, accept it, and make that choice. It's not something, we can all influence and encourage, but every individual, I think time is a critical factor there and when that comes about.
And what we do with it, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll leave it at that. That's all.
Yeah, but yeah, it takes some time. And, but it's obviously it's more than time. It's what's going on in that time, right? So what's going on in that time that convinces us? Yes.
Sometimes going through an experience that's so difficult and so stressful that you understand that you could not have gotten through it without God.
That's a great point, and we've all had those, one degree or another. How about each other? We need each other, maybe, to become convinced and to be encouraged and to learn about God. We have the scriptures, of course. A lot of people read the scriptures and don't believe them. I think as we learn and grow and become convinced of the resurrection, that is certainly something that encourages us to continue in our faith and to grow in our faith. But going back to the question, what does it take to convince us of God's calling to be obedient to that calling? We said us over time. Yeah, Sean?
I think it's also believing that God is going to equip us for that calling, having that faith that if God calls us to something, He is going to equip us for that. And when you were talking about each other, I was thinking of Moses. God called Moses, he had an excuse of why not to go, and God says, okay, here's your brother Aaron, he can speak for you.
Yeah.
So God equipped him through the use of someone else, for that particular calling.
Yeah, and we can, we get around one another, and some of us have been there, done that. And we can encourage each other, and we can be an example of someone that has stepped out in faith towards fulfilling the call of God in their life. And they didn't die. They had a great time. They were successful. We have one another as examples and to encourage one another and to help each other about that. Another question in here, because all of this is based upon what the scriptures tell us. And so the scriptures for us become, the old saying goes, we call it standard of faith and practice. That's an old one, something like that. But it becomes what we base our lives upon and what our worldview is based upon. And we trust that they're true. So what makes it difficult and what makes it possible to believe that the scriptures are really true? If we're going to base our life on them. I used to tell my daughter, we live and die by words. So let's make sure the words we choose to live by are true. There's a lot of fake words that are not true at all, right? Not every thought we have is true. So what makes it easy? What makes it difficult to believe the scriptures are true?
It stood the test of time, and there have been several people who have tried to prove it false, and some of them have ended up becoming Christians because they could not deny, there are just too many things that fit together so well, and communication wasn't what it is today, and yet things came together perfectly. So it's our manual that our what we go to. It's our instructions for how to live. So we don't have anything else. That's all, and so I think that we need to take all that in consideration and trust it as the word, true word.
Well, I do think, Carol?
I believe it because it's been documented. It's a document. It can be proven.
Yeah.
It's not blind faith. It's
Yeah.
a documented faith. Absolutely can be documented.
How do you word it?
Eyewitness accounts.
Oh, yeah.
We,
That's-
we, people talk about or tell other people, well, the Bible says so.
Yeah.
And the people say, well, what's this Bible? I want to go back to the previous question. Nobody mentioned knowledge. We have to know what we're supposed to do before we can embrace it and do it. And we don't even talk about that in our society. But I've been places where you take a young teenager and you say, do you believe in Jesus? And they'll say, who's Jesus? They don't have a clue who Jesus is. And, these are 17, 18-year-old kids. In our society, everybody knows who Jesus is, or most, probably 99.9%. But there are other places where that's not true. And first you have to teach people. They have to understand what it says before they can embrace it. But, this is a collection of historical documents.
Yeah.
The Gospels are eyewitness accounts And I think the hardest part to believe was the resurrection of Jesus. And this is an account of people who actually saw him after he was crucified. And, we sort of, I think, don't understand this and how it was put together and, what it's about.
Well, it makes the point that how important it is for us to learn the scriptures and to take time to study and sit in a class, learn, hear from other people, but put our own time into it. I was talking with someone recently about why their marriage was successful, and they told me it's because they were lucky. And I happen to disagree with that, having been married a long time, because I think if you've been married a long time, maybe there are times when you wonder just how good your luck was. But at the same time, it takes thought, it takes work, it takes education and the application of truth. And I guess certainly, we can be fortunate or unfortunate about some things, but thank you for bringing that point up, because it takes knowledge. It's if we're supposed to speak the truth in love, we've got to know the truth and we've got to know love, and they don't come with our genetic makeup any more than a knowledge of architecture or carpentry or anything else comes. We have to learn. So, Carol?
I wonder too, for me, it's a part of wrangling with God. Like, I find it very interesting that Gideon says to God, "Pardon me, Lord, I gotta do something, I wanna do something." And there's the tension. I personally, I see people afraid to take the word and take it apart and question God about certain things. And that tension between humanity and God, I think from what we can see, God accepts that and wants that. And Gideon is a classic example of the yin and yang.
Yeah. And a very personal relationship.
Yes,
He's
yes.
willing to express his doubts, angers, fears to God.
Yes.
And it's a great example to us about, he was passionate about God, no question, and being right before God and expressing his doubts and fears and all that. So, any other thoughts on that?
I think Carol brings up an excellent point. I think our relationship with God, it's a constant dialogue, and God expects
Constant
that.
dialogue. That's
If we're
great.
just sitting back blindly, not challenging him or questioning him, I think God's upstairs questioning me. This is just me talking. I feel like God looks at me and says, "Brian, I want you to ask me questions. Talk to me, man. Let's figure this thing out."
No.
And I think, to Carol's point, as we see it, these are all witnessed dialogues, which makes our faith stronger and our belief stronger when we have that kind of back and forth interaction with our God. He wants that from us because it closes the deal. It makes us stronger, bonded to him.
When it
To
says,
me, what you're saying is kind of like the first argument you have with your spouse. You first get married and you have that first argument. It's kind of scary because you wonder, is this the end? But it's really just the beginning. And in the working that out, that disagreement out, our relationship becomes stronger in our marriage because we see, hey, we can disagree, but we can figure it out and go on. It just doesn't mean it's the end. And I think what you're talking about, what Carol's talking about, is it's kind of like that, you become a Christian, you hear all these great things about God, you hear about how mighty he is, and you're kind of maybe a little intimidated to disagree with him or question him. And but it's not like that at all. So I've gotten through 2 points of 5 takeaways. But this has been good. We can pick it up next week. So thank you for coming, and we'll see you in church.
Rick, I want to say one thing about what Brian said, talking about prayer.
Uh-huh.
That one in the scripture one talks about prayer, without ceasing,
Uh-huh,
I think it's what he's talking about, it's that conversation all 24/7.
Yeah.
You're talking,